Pleasant morning to everyone joining in the virtual press conference of the Philippine Statistics Authority for the third quarter 2020 National Accounts of the Philippines. Before we start, we would like to inform everyone that we are live streamed to the PSA Facebook page. Updates are also tweeted on our Twitter page using the hashtag PHGDP. We are honored today to be joined by Acting Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick T. Chua, PhD, of the National Economic and Development Authority. We are also pleased to have with us today Undersecretary Dennis S. Mapa, PhD, National Statistician and Civil Registrar General of the Philippine Statistics Authority, who will be reporting on the performance of the Philippine economy for the third quarter this year. Let us listen to Undersecretary Mapa.
Good morning, everyone. The Philippine Statistics Authority will now report the performance of the Philippine economy for the third quarter of 2020. The gross domestic product growth rate recorded a decline of negative 11.5% in the third quarter of 2020. Growth rates of the gross national income, GNI, and net primary income, or NPI, from the rest of the world declined at a rate of negative 13% and negative 28.2%, respectively. On a seasonally adjusted basis, GDP and GNI posted positive quarter-on-quarter growth rates of 8% and 6.3%, respectively, in the third quarter of 2020. Among the major economic industries, agriculture posted a growth rate of 1.2% in the third quarter of 2020. On the other hand, industry and services both recorded contractions of negative 17.2% and negative 10.6%, respectively, in the same period. On a seasonally adjusted basis, agriculture, industry, and services all posted positive quarter-on-quarter growth rates of 1%, 7.6%, and 9.5%, respectively. With the country's projected population reaching 108.8 million in the third quarter of 2020, per capita GDP growth rate declined by 12.7% from a 4.8% growth in the same quarter of the previous year. Meanwhile, growth rates of per capita GNI and per capita household final consumption expenditure also posted contraction of negative 14.2% and negative 10.5%, respectively. Among the three major economic industries, services and industry pulled down the growth of the economy by negative 6.7 percentage points and negative 4.9 percentage points, respectively. On the other hand, agriculture contributed positively to the GDP growth in the third quarter of 2020 with 0.1 percentage point. Other services, which consist of institutions providing personal care services and entertainment, arts and recreation services such as salons, casino, and museum, contracted the most in the third quarter of 2020 with a decline of negative 53.4%. This is followed by accommodation and food service activities, which includes hotels, Airbnbs, restaurants, and other food providers, with a decline of negative 52.7%. Construction, with a decline of negative 39.8%, and transportation and storage, with a decline of negative 28.1%. On the other hand, financial and insurance activities, which consist of banking and non-banking institutions providing financial services, posted the highest growth rate in the third quarter of 2020 with 6.2%. This was followed by public administration and defense with 4.5%, agriculture, forestry, and fishing with 1.2%, and information and communication with 0.8%. Major contributors to the decline were construction with 3.3 negative percentage points, real estate and ownership of dwellings with negative 1.6 percentage points, and manufacturing with negative 1.59 percentage points. On the other hand, positive contributors to the GDP growth in the third quarter of 2020 were financial and insurance activities with 0.5 percentage point, public administration and defense, compulsory social security with 0.2 percentage point, and agriculture, forestry, and fishing with 0.1 percentage point. On the demand side, only government final consumption expenditure posted a positive growth rate in the third quarter of 2020 with 5.8%. Meanwhile, valuables posted the largest contraction in the third quarter of 2020 with a decline of 53.2%. This was followed by construction with a contraction of minus 43.5%, durable equipment with a contraction of negative 34.4%, and export of services with a decline of negative 32.8%. In the third quarter of 2020, major contributors to the decline were construction with negative 7.6 percentage points, household final consumption expenditure with negative 6.6 percentage points, and durable equipment with negative 2.7 percentage points. On the other hand, positive contributors to the GDP growth from the expenditure side were net exports with 4.4 percentage points and government final consumption expenditure with 0.7 percentage point. The Philippine Statistics Authority appreciates your presence in this third quarter 2020 National Accounts Press Conference. And we look forward to meeting you again on January 28, 2021, when we report the performance of the Philippine economy for the fourth quarter of 2020 and for the whole year of 2020. Thank you very much and good morning.
Thank you very much, Undersecretary Mapa, for your informative report. And now to deliver the joint statement of the Duterte administration's economic managers on the third quarter 2020 performance of the Philippine economy, let us listen to Acting Socioeconomic Planning Secretary Carl Kendrick T. Chua, PhD, of the National Economic and Development Authority.
Colleagues in government, friends from the media, fellow Filipinos, good morning. Our experience with COVID-19 over the past several months tells us two things. First, the economy is strong enough to recover if we enable it to do so. Second, our best recourse to help the economy is to manage the risks. Managing risks instead of avoiding them will allow us to safely open more of the economy and help Filipinos recover their sources of income. This will also put the Philippines back on its solid growth and development trajectory. The third quarter of 2020 saw the country dance with the virus, 2 steps forward and 1 step back. In August, the National Capital Region, or NCR, and neighboring provinces reverted to modified Enhanced Community Quarantine, or MECQ, status for 2 weeks to respond to the increase in COVID-19 cases and to help prepare the hospital critical care units. Earlier in June and July, Cebu City also reverted to Enhanced Community Quarantine and then MECQ to improve its health system. Several other local government units also went back to more stringent quarantines to save lives. These actions gave us time to expand our capacity to deal with the contagion. From almost zero capacity in February, daily testing capacity reached 111,605 on November 4, with 160 labs providing RT-PCR testing, while daily testing reached a peak of 46,597 on September 11. From a handful of DOH personnel as contact tracers, we now have over 253,442 trained contact tracers deployed across the country as of November 6. More testing and vigilant contact tracing led to the detection of more cases, as expected, but the far majority, at 94%, are asymptomatic or mildly sick. More importantly, we have reduced the number of future infections because we have also implemented more effective isolation protocols. Of around 393,961 total cases as of November 7, reported deaths numbered 7,485, equivalent to a case fatality rate of 1.9%. This is much lower than the 17% in April. Total active cases are manageable at 36,260, of which around 2,283 or 6% are severely or critically ill, requiring hospital care. We have also used the quarantine period wisely to boost our capacity to treat those requiring hospitalization. Throughout the country, some 21,909 hospital beds are dedicated to COVID-19 as of November 4. Of the total allocated beds, only around 39% is occupied. This means that the country is ready to care for COVID-19 patients. However, these concerted efforts do not come without costs. The economic team is optimistic that the worst is over for the country. The smaller GDP contraction of 11.5% in the third quarter from a contraction of 16.9% in the second quarter indicates that the economy is on the mend. The path is clearer to a stronger bounce back in 2021. The double-digit contraction in the third quarter is not surprising given the return to more stringent quarantine measures in NCR and neighboring provinces and Cebu City, which together account for around 60% of the Philippine economy. In addition, the public transportation was restricted. This prevented many Filipinos from leaving their homes and reporting for work, even if their industries are allowed to operate. For instance, in NCR, some 58.2% of workers were allowed to resume work in September. However, public transportation at that time could only accommodate 35.5% because of social distancing rules and lower operator turnout. This means some 22.7% of NCR workers could not go back to work. Nonetheless, the economy has begun to recover. On a quarter-on-quarter basis, the economy grew by 8% in the third quarter, reflecting the return of economic activities as the quarantine was eased. On the expenditure side, households and firms have begun to recover, with smaller contractions in household consumption, firm investments, exports, and imports. In particular, goods exports grew by a positive 2.2% in September as the economy of our major trading partners in the region recovered, notably China. With the expiration of Bayanihan 1 in June and Bayanihan 2 still in Congress, government consumption growth slowed to 5.8%. According to the Department of Budget and Management, actual infrastructure disbursement in the third quarter exceeded program levels by 12.1%. Although this was lower than the third quarter 2019 level by 28% in real terms. This is not surprising given the catch-up spending carried out in the second half of last year after the late passage of the 2019 budget. On the supply side, agriculture growth slowed to 1.2% as the sector faced a number of plant and animal diseases. These headwinds, however, had minimal effect on overall food supply, as evidenced by falling food inflation in the same period. Both industry and services also showed a smaller contraction, consistent with the initial recovery of employment, where some 7.5 million workers returned in the third quarter. This reduced the unemployment rate to 10% in July from 17.7% in April when the quarantine was at its strictest. Recent developments show that the Philippines' economic fundamentals remain strong, and managing risk going forward will allow us to open up even more of the economy safely to accelerate the recovery. The Cabinet has recently approved measures to further open up the economy in the fourth quarter, subject to enforcing the minimum health standards and enhancing the Prevent, Detect, Isolate, Treat, and Reintegrate strategy, or the PDITR strategy. Starting October, new guidelines by the Department of Trade and Industry allow more sectors to expand capacity to between 75 to 100%. The Department of Transportation, on the other hand, has also issued guidelines to increase public transport capacity using a combination of faster turnaround, service contracting, and adequate social distancing, such as the one-seat apart rule while following the 7 commandments. At the same time, as the economy opens up, the government continues to ensure hospitals are equipped and preparation for vaccine procurement is underway. These policies to manage risks will help limit total COVID-19 cases, ensure we are able to care for the critically and severely ill, and allow everyone else to safely return to work and address their non-COVID-19 health needs. Successful implementation of this strategy will also help improve consumer confidence to support near-term growth. As the government pursues efforts to avoid virus surges while easing restrictions on businesses and transportation, the economic team is hopeful that Congress will do its part to help the economy bounce back by passing the pending recovery bills within the year. These are the 2021 General Appropriations Act, the Corporate Recovery and Tax Incentives for Enterprises, or CREATE Act, the Government Financial Institutions Unified Initiative to Distress Enterprises for Economic Recovery, or the GUIDE Act, and the Financial Institutions Strategic Transfer, or the FIST Act. CREATE will lower the corporate income tax outright from 30% to 25% as soon as it is made effective. This will be the biggest stimulus package ever for businesses, benefiting mostly micro, small, and medium enterprises, or MSMEs, that comprise 99% of businesses and employ over 60% of Filipino workers. FIST will help banks dispose non-performing loans and assets so that they can free up money and capital to extend more credit, especially to small businesses. Meanwhile, GUIDE will provide equity support to strategically important companies facing insolvency. All three bills are important elements of the recovery program to address specific needs of businesses. In the fourth quarter, the full release and utilization of Bayanihan 2 is crucial to improving 2020 GDP prospects. As of November 3, 80 billion pesos, or some 58% of the 140 billion pesos in regular appropriations for Bayanihan 2 have been released. Finally, the 2021 budget will provide us with some of the heftiest tools necessary to rebuild our economy. The timely passage of this bill is crucial in helping attain the 6.5 to 7.5 GDP growth target for next year. With an infrastructure budget amounting to 1.121 trillion pesos, some 1.7 million jobs can be created. With its high multiplier effect, the Build, Build, Build program will play a pivotal role in our economic recovery. A delay in the passage of the budget will be detrimental to the economy and our recovery. Each day of delay will result in 1.1 billion pesos not spent. To conclude, our experience in 2020 thus far shows our resilience as a nation. We are aware of and very thankful of the many sacrifices the Filipino people have to make, from mothers who juggle work while helping their children study remotely, to healthcare workers in testing centers and in hospitals who risk their lives to detect the virus and care for the very sick, some of them our family members and close friends. A major part of our success in controlling virus transmission is the cooperation of people in making the minimum health standards a part of their daily lives. All these small contributions go a long way in our recovery process. Like before, We will make sure that we will not let this crisis go to waste. The Duterte administration will do all that is necessary so that adequate, prudent, and timely policies and responses help bring our country back to its inclusive growth trajectory. The challenges are immense, but we are determined to build back a better economy our people deserve. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua. Before we start the open forum, we are pleased to welcome our press or media partners joining us today via video conferencing. For our question and answer segment, press or media partners were requested to email their questions in advance. So we will begin with the advanced questions. Then we will accommodate other questions live from the press. You can do so by using the raise hand feature, or you can send your questions via the chat box. Once called, kindly state your name and organization. For the first set of questions related to GDP ways forward or forecast, we have a question from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ANC addressed to USEC MAPA. Is the full year GDP forecast of government for 2020 still feasible?
Okay, thank you, Warren. The average growth for the first 3 quarters is negative 10%. And I understand the full year forecast of the government is negative 5.5%. At this point, that is no longer feasible.
Another question, this time from Ms. Heriza Valencia of Philippine Star addressed to Secretary Chua. Coming from the third quarter results, what is the outlook for the fourth quarter 2020, taking into consideration also that the last 3 months of the year are also the typhoon season?
Thank you for the question. One of the things that we did differently in the fourth quarter is to change our policy from risk avoidance to risk management. And that is why starting October, the cabinet has approved policies to open up more of the economy. The DTI has issued guidelines that allowed opening of the economy in certain sectors from 75 to 100%. We have also opened up further the public transportation system. And these two are, we believe, are crucial in further improving the prospects for the fourth quarter. So this is, I think, going to show further improvements in the last quarter. Thank you. Now, on the typhoons, this year in the fourth quarter, we saw 4 typhoons, 2 of them rather strong. So they will have an impact on the GDP. But unlike the COVID-19 pandemic, typhoons or natural disasters arising from typhoons are recurring events, which we have already internalized in our estimates, although sometimes the typhoons can become more destructive. So these are being factored in, and the DBCC will be meeting immediately to reassess the latest numbers to see if there is a need to adjust the full year projections. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua. Another question from Ms. Kai Ordinario of Business Mirror. How will third quarter performance affect full year growth, especially with the downward revision in the second quarter? Will we be revising our targets? Why or why not?
Well, let me take that. Apart from what I already said in my previous response, let me just add that in the second quarter, that was the peak of the crisis where we had the stringent lockdown or the ECQ. In the third quarter, while we did relax, we reverted to ECQ in Cebu City and MECQ for a part of Cebu City in July, and NCR and adjacent provinces in August. So those show that the impact on the economy were actually more severe than expected. Now, coming to the fourth quarter, one of the policies approved by Cabinet is that we will no longer have a reversal or more stringent quarantine as our response to possible surges in cases. Instead, we will pursue a strategy wherein we will impose or enhance the implementation of the minimum health standard, and is, if needed, as a last resort, resort to the localized lockdown. So all of these suggest that the trajectory is better in the fourth quarter compared to the first two quarters, despite the contraction that we saw in those two preceding quarters. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chura. We have a follow-up question. Since the negative 5.5% full year GDP is no longer feasible, what is now the new full year projection?
Well, when the DBCC met in July to propose the projections for the budget, the range is up to, I believe, 6.6% contraction. As I mentioned, immediately after this, the DBCC process will start to reassess where we are, and we will report it as soon as we have done the reassessment, given the latest figures. Thank you. Excuse me, for some reason I cannot hear. I don't know if everyone can hear.
Hello. Let me repeat the question, Secretary Carl. This one is a question from Ms. Bea Laforga of Business World. Given the worse than expected second quarter GDP of negative 16.9% reported last Monday and the third quarter GDP released today, how would this affect DBCC's full year GDP forecasts? Also, what's their impact on poverty and unemployment rates for 2020 and 2021?
As I mentioned, given the latest numbers that we are seeing, and the DBCC actually looks at these numbers on a regular basis, the DBCC will be meeting immediately to reassess these numbers. Now, the main difference, I think, for the fourth quarter is a different strategy that we are undertaking. Unlike in the past quarters, wherein we had to close a significant portion of our economy so that we can prepare the health system, we are balancing that very carefully this time and managing the risk. So we are capitalizing on the benefits in or our progress in the health system, notably our improved testing, contact tracing, and treatment strategy, so that we can gradually and safely open more of the economy. So that will also have a very positive effect on the fourth quarter GDP. Now, when we put the numbers together, we will have to discuss also with the Department of Finance on the revenue side, with the DBM on the government spending, and also with the BSP on the external side, so that we can put them all together and see how the full year GDP will turn out. So this is a process that we will begin immediately using the third quarter GDP. And the second quarter updates. Now, the impact on unemployment and poverty will also be part of the reassessment. So far, we have reported that unemployment may average around 11%, and our poverty may either improve slightly to below 16% or deteriorate slightly but temporarily to around, I believe, 17.5%. So all of these will be part of our reassessment immediately after this forum. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Now, the next set of questions are related to Build, 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 or BBB. This one is from Mr. De Guzman of ANC. Which BBB projects are contributing to economic activity and growth? What unforeseen delays in BBB projects have contributed to slower activity?
Well, as you know, the Build program, that is a very big program, and many of them are small and medium-sized projects that have been funded through the regular appropriations in the last 4 years. And next year, we will continue to see further increases in our Build program. The budget for infrastructure next year is around 1.1 or 1.2 trillion peso. That will exceed 5% of GDP because that is the important hurdle that we have to make a significant impact on growth. And that will also, because of the higher multiplier effect, create some 1.7 million direct and indirect jobs. Now, within the BBB, we are monitoring 104 infrastructure flagship projects, and around 20, except for 26 of them, all of them are in the pre-construction or the construction phase, and they are also all proceeding as we speak. Some of them have been affected by the quarantines, some of them affected by the dispatch of experts from foreign countries because of travel restriction. There have been some delays due to right-of-way, and also some problems related to more recent weather disturbances in some regions that may have temporarily affected the build. But we believe that in the fourth quarter, we will resume many of the construction and even accelerate in the 2021. So we do not have the details at this point, but we can request them from the DOTR and the DPWH on more project level details. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Another question from Ms. Valencia of Philippine Star. On the BBB pipeline for flagship projects, has there been a new review already? If so, what changes to the pipeline were made?
Well, that review is ongoing. As I mentioned, of the 104 projects, all are in the pre-construction or the construction phase, and only around 26 are in the processing stage. So these projects are continuously being reviewed, and we will continue to accelerate the projects that are already compliant with the requirements so that they can begin at the soonest possible time. Now, the departments implementing the smaller or medium-sized projects also do their evaluation and recommend to the DBM for their continued funding in the next year's budget. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. We have a question from Mr. Ralph Rivas of Rappler. How confident is the economic team that construction projects will be fast next year? How many big infra projects are expected to begin construction next year? And can you name some projects?
Well, on the projects, let me refer you to the NEDA website, where a list of 104 projects, of which, except for the 26 that are being processed right now, are all in the construction or the pre-construction stages. So those are the projects that you may refer to by name. Now, in the past, we have had difficulties with accelerating our infrastructure, but the last 4 years have shown that we are able to push our infrastructure spending from less than 3% to almost or exceeding 5% of GDP. In fact, last year in 2019, when the 2019 budget was delayed by, I think, around 5 months, we were able to implement a catch-up plan in the third quarter and fourth quarter of 2019. All these suggest that we have a track record in accelerating our infrastructure spending. The challenge this year, of course, is possible deceleration in some areas where there are still more stringent lockdowns. So we will have to balance that to ensure that while we pursue the infrastructure projects, they are done with the safety of the workers in mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Now, the next set of questions are related to COVID-19 pandemic or recovery. This one is a question from Ms. Valencia of Philippine Star. For 2021, how do you see the pace of recovery shaping up, considering recent indicators?
Well, if we look at the trend from the second quarter, we are seeing important developments, major developments, from almost 17% contraction in the second quarter to a much lower double-digit contraction at 11.5. And as I mentioned, given the policy changes and the further opening up of the economy and the policy not to revert to more stringent lockdown, I think the trend really is further improvement in the fourth quarter. And hopefully, we will begin to see better figures or positive quarter growths, year-on-year quarter growth starting early next year. And the programs that we have laid out, the 2021 budget, the CREATE bill, the FIS, and the GUIDE bills are all important elements in ensuring that we accelerate the recovery alongside our risk management strategy. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Next question is from Ms. Ordinario of Business Mirror. How will Typhoon Rolly affect the economy? Will this dampen fourth quarter 2020 growth? Why or why not?
Well, as I mentioned, typhoons are recurring. We experience almost 20 typhoons entering our area of responsibility every year. Unfortunately, some of them are more damaging than others. So we have begun to collect data from the OCD and the other agencies in the NDRRMC. And basically, the preliminary data that we saw from 4 typhoons in the fourth quarter of 2020, these are typhoons or storms, Pepito, Quinta, Rolly, and Shoni, have led to some 24 billion peso in damages, or around 0.13% of GDP. These are, the 24 billion is Typhoon Rolly alone. And if we account for the 4 other typhoons, the 3 other typhoons in combination with Typhoon Rolly, that's around 38.8 billion, or 0.21% of our GDP. Our GDP is almost 18 trillion. So when we put them all together, the impact on the country's growth rate preliminarily is around a reduction of around 0.055 percentage points. So I think this is a manageable level. What is important is we fast track the recovery so that more people will be reintegrated back after the disaster phase. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Now the next set of questions are from Ms. Valencia of Philippine Star. The World Bank and the Asian Development Bank have both announced that they will be extending assistance to developing countries to finance the procurement of vaccines as well as the establishment of distribution systems. Is the government considering to tap these funding sources?
I think the question is better addressed to our vaccine czar, Secretary Galvez, but I did hear from his press con that he informed that the government is considering all possible sources, including multilaterals. So I think the details would be better asked from our vaccine czar. Thank you.
Another question from Ms. Valencia. Since NEDA is part of the task group that will be mapping out the eventual procurement, storage, and distribution of vaccines, what will be the agency's role in this vaccine cluster headed by Secretary Galvez?
The task group has yet to discuss the specific roles of the members like NEDA. The immediate ones, of course, are procurement and financing. So that is really in the area of DOH, DOF, and DBM. Maybe one thing that NEDA could support using its comparative advantage is because we are working with the PSA on the national ID. We could also provide some way to support the identification of priority beneficiaries. The other thing that NEDA typically does as part of its mandate is the monitoring and evaluation of the program. So those are the things that we could contribute. However, the details, of course, will have to be discussed and agreed more formally. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Another question from Ms. Valencia. What can be the opportunities for the private sector in the eventual rollout of the immunization program against COVID-19?
Well, I understand the vaccine program to reach all 110 million Filipinos would require both the government and the private sector working together. So I think the opportunities are there. Again, the details would be better addressed by Secretary Galvez.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. We have a question from Mr. Warren de Guzman of ANC for Yusek Dennis Mapa. Do the numbers fully account for e-commerce and other new tech sectors? If yes, how?
Okay, thank you, Warren. The digital economy sector, such as the ICT and the e-commerce, are now fully covered as the result of the overall revision and rebasing of our national accounts. For the quarterly estimates, we updated the levels based on indicators from those engaged in e-commerce, like transactions from online trading, delivery services, and courier. So e-commerce component are now incorporated in the estimates of the gross domestic product. Thank you.
Thank you, Undersecretary Mapa. We have another question from Ms. Ordinario of Business Mirror. Do you see world trade improving next year with Mr. Joe Biden as US President? Yes. If yes, why? If not, why not?
Well, I do not know on that question regarding Mr. Biden, but the World Bank and the IMF and the ADB have indicated that there will be some time before trade fully recovers. But we expect next year to be better than this year in terms of global GDP prospects and trade prospects. And the Philippines, with the structural reforms that we have undertaken, such as the tax reform, the build, and further opening up of the economy through the, for instance, the Public Service Act, those can help actually improve our performance on international trade. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Secretary Chua. We have questions from Ms. Eileen Mencias of Abante. Former NEDA Secretary, economists at the Philippine Economic Society discussions yesterday said that the government should spend more because it has a lot of fiscal space and credit ratings agencies are forgiving of economies that have done that, such as Malaysia and Thailand. Why is there a reluctance? Also, a follow-up question. Fiscal response plays a crucial role during periods of economic shocks. Given the worse than expected performance of the economy, is there a need to revisit government spending for 2021?
Well, as to the first question, we are presenting to the people a package of recovery. So we have fiscal stimulus, and under the Duterte administration's four-pillar socioeconomic strategy, under Pillar 1, emergency support, we have provided already 505.6 billion pesos to support vulnerable groups. Under Pillar 2 of the four-pillar strategy, we have provided 53.2 billion peso to support the fight against COVID, notably in the healthcare sector. Under Pillar 3, we have provided 1.3 trillion peso in liquidity infusion. So this is our monetary support. And under Pillar 4, and we hope this Create, FIS, Guide, and Bayanihan 2 will be fully released and utilized. We are providing 699.8 billion peso. So the total is by the trillions. So that is the first. So we are not shy in providing both fiscal and monetary support. We are also doing other support, such as the passage of Create, which will lower the income tax immediately for 99% of MSMEs and that employ 60% of workers. We are pursuing the passage of the FIS and the Guide bills that will help more of the banks help the distressed firms either facing liquidity or solvency issues. We have also changed our policy to risk management, and that is why we are opening more of the economy. So I believe we have to look at this entire recovery as a package. and not only certain pieces of that package. And the second is countries, yes, some other countries like Malaysia or the United Kingdom have provided more, but they did provide it also as a combination of fiscal, monetary, financial, and even their own pension support. So we should see it in that light also as a package. And it is not necessary that the amount will deliver the results. Malaysia and the UK had a very big package, but their second quarter year-on-year growth was worse than Philippines. So we should be looking at not only the amount within the package, but the allocation and how effective that we use those support. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. We have a follow-up question. Senator Soto said the budget will be prioritized and the latter bills will only be tackled after. If and when the Senate fails to pass CREATE or FIST this year, what is the government's contingency? Is spending more on the table?
Well, I understand CREATE is being discussed in the plenary, and the Senate will consider the FIST. And they, I believe, have enough time to pass the budget and the three other bills that I have mentioned. There is significant experience from the past when we pass crucial reforms that even at the last minute, the Senate and the Congress are able to deliver. So we will be hopeful for that. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Another question from Ms. Mencias. Economists at the PES yesterday also said the Arise bill will be more effective for an economic rebound as opposed to CREATE, as the tax perks it offers are more likely to encourage investments from private companies, many of which are starting at losses. What went into the decision to push for a supply-side stimulus over a demand-side stimulus?
Well, as I mentioned, we are proposing a package. And I think that is the most effective way of addressing different needs of businesses who are affected. As I mentioned, under the Duterte administration's four-pillar socioeconomic strategy against COVID, Pillar 1, emergency support, we have provided 505.6 billion pesos. Pillar 2, under the support to fight COVID, this is for the healthcare sector, 53.2 billion pesos. 1.3 trillion pesos liquidity infusion to the economy. And for Pillar 4, this is Bayanihan, CREATE, and the other important programs in the fourth quarter is 699.8 billion pesos. On top of that, we have the infrastructure program for next year, which is 1.12 trillion, and our 2021 budget. So we have to look at this as a package, as I mentioned. That is where we will be able to address the multiple needs of the people. Second, the government, NEDA, the DOF, in coordination with the private sector and the multilaterals, have fielded 3 surveys to ask directly businesses what their needs are. We did this in April, we did this in June, and we did this in July, August. And the answers to that are exactly what we are doing. The businesses say that number one, the top 3 requests are the deferment of the payment of rental, interest, loans, utilities. So we did that under Bayanihan 1 and Bayanihan 2. Number 2, they want cheap access to financing. So we did that also under Bayanihan 2 by providing interest rate subsidy, credit guarantees, and further infusion to Land Bank, DBP, and Phil guarantee. And number 3, they asked for lower taxes, and also the longer net operating loss carryover. So I believe the government has been responding actually to these surveys where more than 100,000 MSMEs participated. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. We're accommodating the last 2 questions. This one is for Yusek Mapa and Secretary Carl. What should be the Q4 performance to meet the DBCC's earlier negative 5.5% projection?
Based on our estimate, we need to grow about 6.6 in the fourth quarter to get an average of minus 5.5 negative.
Thank you, Yusek Mapa. This one is from Mr. Ralph Rivas of Rappler. As full year GDP will be lower than expected, how will this affect the deficit target? Will spending be controlled in Q4 to not breach the deficit target?
Well, again, given the latest data, the DBCC will have to reassess the entire macro fiscal framework. So the moment we have the results, they will be shared with the public. Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Chua. Okay, since those are the last questions, we would like to thank everyone for joining us in the third quarter 2020 National Accounts of the Philippines press briefing. We hope for your continued support to the upcoming press briefing on the October 2020 Labor Force Survey to be held